Welcome to Sinister Truths. Tonight we dive into a story so forbidden, so scandalous, it could have shattered an entire community in 1839 Savannah, Georgia. Picture a world bound by strict social codes, where status and lineage dictated every choice, and yet one wealthy widow dared to defy them all. She made a decision so shocking, so daring, that it would leave society whispering for decades. She married the son of her own late slave. Can you imagine the courage, the controversy, the sheer audacity of such a choice in a time when even a glance across the social divide could ignite scandal? Before we reveal this forbidden tale, tell us in the comments which country you're watching from and what time of day it is, and don't forget to subscribe for more dark and untold stories from history. The widow lived in the heart of Savannah, a city whose streets were lined with stately mansions and shaded by ancient oaks dripping with Spanish moss. Her family had long been established in the region, their name carrying weight in every social gathering and business transaction. Born into privilege, she had been accustomed from an early age to a life of refinement, comfort, and expectation. Her childhood had been one of strict routines and lessons designed to prepare her for a prominent social life, filled with etiquette classes, music lessons, and the subtle arts of conversation and influence. She was taught to walk with poise, to speak with measured grace, and to understand the intricate hierarchies that govern Southern society. Even as a young girl, she could sense the invisible currents of power that ran through every interaction, understanding intuitively when to assert herself and when to yield. Her marriage had elevated her into an even higher echelon of Savannah society. She had wed a man of significant wealth and influence, whose plantations spanned acres of fertile land, and whose business dealings reached beyond the city into distant ports and markets. Together, their household was one of grandeur and order, where servants moved silently through the halls attending to every need, and where social gatherings were meticulously planned to reinforce alliances and display status. After her husband's death, she inherited not only his fortune, but also the responsibilities of managing the estate, overseeing financial matters, and maintaining the social prominence that had defined her family for generations. Despite the privileges of her position, the weight of expectation was immense. Widows of her standing were expected to remain demure, to observe mourning rituals with diligence, to refrain from overt displays of ambition, and to ultimately consider remarriage as a strategic necessity, ideally to someone of equal or higher social rank. A widow who sought independence, who entertained unconventional ideas, or who cultivated relationships outside her class could risk ruin, both socially and economically. Yet, she was not a woman to be easily contained by societal norms. Her upbringing had instilled in her a combination of intelligence, curiosity, and resilience that set her apart from her peers. She possessed a sharp mind that could navigate business negotiations with the same ease as a conversation at a social gathering, and she held a keen awareness of human nature, able to read emotions and intentions in those around her. Her education had been thorough, encompassing not only the expected lessons in literature and music, but also an understanding of the broader world, politics, commerce, and even the moral debates that subtly pervaded Southern society. She was capable of empathy and compassion, yet she also understood the mechanisms of power and control, recognizing that influence could be exercised not only through wealth, but also through presence, decision-making, and the quiet assertion of authority. Her personality was a complex blend of warmth, intellect, and subtle defiance. She could charm a room with ease, engage in thoughtful discourse, and maintain her composure under scrutiny, yet there was a restlessness beneath the surface, a sense that the narrow confines of her prescribed life were insufficient. Unlike other widows who might have sought security through another advantageous marriage or conformed entirely to societal expectations, she carried a curiosity about the world that extended beyond her social circle. She was drawn to ideas, people, and experiences that challenged conventional thinking. Though she was careful to navigate these interests discreetly, understanding the consequences of being openly contrarian in a community where gossip and reputation held immense power, This strength of character was matched by the considerable social and economic power she wielded. Her wealth allowed her to manage plantations, hire skilled overseers, and influence the local economy through her investments and property holdings. Her estate was not only a home but also a center of labor, production, and social activity. Slaves worked her land, tending to crops, maintaining the household, and performing skilled labor, yet the contrast between her life and theirs could not have been starker. While she moved through her days with comfort, autonomy, and access to education and refinement, the enslaved individuals under her authority lived under strict control, their freedom curtailed, their lives dictated by the demands of survival and service. This disparity was a daily reality she could not ignore. She was aware of the humanity of those who served her, observing their interactions, understanding their strengths, and noting their resilience in the face of oppression. Yet society demanded that she maintain a strict hierarchy, a separation that underscored her privilege and reinforced the rigid class distinctions of the time. Despite this, she did not allow her power to make her indifferent. There was a careful attention in the way she managed her estate and interacted with her household staff. She was known for fairness in her dealings with those who served her, for maintaining standards that, while strict, were just within the context of the era. She recognized the intelligence and capability of those around her, and though bound by the legal and social framework that defined slavery, she cultivated an environment where skill and loyalty were acknowledged, and where personal agency, though limited, could be expressed in small ways. This understanding would later shape her actions in ways that society could neither predict nor control, and it would set the stage for the extraordinary choice that would define her legacy. Her life before the scandal was thus a complex tapestry of privilege and responsibility, constraint and curiosity, power and awareness. Each day was structured, yet filled with potential for quiet exploration. She walked the halls of her mansion, oversaw the labor on her plantations, hosted social gatherings, and navigated a world where every gesture and word was scrutinized. She balanced her social duties with private reflection, understanding that her status was both a shield and a cage. She had the wealth to exert influence, the intellect to navigate challenges, and the inner resolve to question norms. But she was ever conscious of the boundaries that society had imposed upon her. Boundaries that would soon be tested in ways that no one in Savannah could have anticipated. Her upbringing had instilled in her a deep sense of discernment, the ability to weigh risk against reward, and to act with strategic foresight. She was taught to value family legacy and reputation. Yet she also learned the subtleties of choice, that while some paths were dictated by custom, others could be carved through courage, insight, and a willingness to challenge expectation. She understood that wealth was not merely a measure of material comfort, but a tool that could shape lives, alter social dynamics, and, if wielded wisely, create spaces for personal autonomy in a world that often denied it to women. This understanding informed her every decision, from the management of her household to the consideration of alliances, friendships, and social engagements. Within this context, the widow's life was both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary in that she moved through predictable social rituals, maintained appearances, and fulfilled the roles expected of a woman of her station. Extraordinary in that she possessed a vision and inner strength that allowed her to perceive opportunities, empathize with those beyond her class, and contemplate choices that others might have deemed impossible or dangerous. She was both a product of her time and a woman ahead of it, navigating a world defined by rigid hierarchy, entrenched power structures, and moral codes that were as unforgiving as they were absolute. The contrast between her life and the lives of the enslaved individuals on her plantation could not have been more pronounced. She dined on fine china, dressed in silks and lace, and moved through the city and countryside with the freedom that her status provided. The enslaved men, women, and children worked from sunrise to sunset, performing backbreaking labor in the fields, kitchens, and workshops, their personal desires and choices subordinated to the demands of ownership and production. Yet she was keenly aware of their humanity, their resilience, and their capacity for loyalty and intelligence. This awareness, combined with her own courage and independent thinking, would later inform decisions that defied convention and scandalized a society built upon strict social separation. Her personality, wealth, and position set her apart, but so did her inner life, which was rich with reflection, observation, and quiet rebellion against conformity. She found fascination in the stories of others, in the hidden strengths and ambitions of those around her, and in the small moments of courage displayed daily by those considered beneath her. She understood the power of empathy, of listening and learning, and of recognizing value in unexpected places. In doing so, she cultivated an awareness that would allow her to cross boundaries that most in her society would never dare to approach, to challenge the rigidity of class, and to consider a path that few would have imagined possible. By the time she encountered the man who would become central to her scandalous decision, she had already lived a life shaped by privilege, responsibility, and the subtle defiance of expectation. She had inherited wealth and influence, managed her estate with competence, and navigated Savannah society with grace and discernment. Her upbringing had prepared her for the public scrutiny and social pressures that came with her station, yet it had also nurtured an independence of thought and action that few women of her era possessed. She understood the stakes, the risks, and the societal consequences of stepping beyond prescribed roles. But she also recognized that within her power lay the possibility of choices that could redefine her life and the lives of those around her. It was this combination of awareness, courage, and empathy that distinguished her from other widows, and that would ultimately lead her toward a decision that society would find shocking, controversial, and unforgettable. She lived in a world of wealth and privilege, yet she was not blind to the inequities that surrounded her. She held power, yet she was capable of questioning how it was used. She navigated social expectation, yet she possessed the courage to imagine a life unbound by it. Her story, rooted in this complex interplay of circumstance, character, and conscience, was poised to intersect with the life of the son of her late slave in ways that would defy every rule of her society, and in doing so, leave a mark on history that continues to fascinate, unsettle, and inspire curiosity to this day. The son of the widow's late slave had grown up in a world defined by limitations, boundaries, and unrelenting labor. Born into bondage on her family's plantation, his earliest memories were of vast fields stretching endlessly beneath the southern sun, the rich scent of tilled soil mingling with the sweat of laboring bodies, and the constant presence of overseers whose sharp eyes and harsher words kept every movement in check. From infancy, his life was marked by the rhythms of work and survival, a life in which freedom was a concept whispered about, never touched, and often punished when glimpsed too clearly. Yet within him, even in those earliest years, there was a spark of something different, a keen awareness of the world beyond the boundaries of his station, a curiosity that set him apart from other children born into the same oppressive circumstances. He was taught, in the limited ways permitted by law and custom, the skills necessary to navigate the plantation. He learned to care for animals, to tend crops, and to carry out the intricate tasks required to maintain the household and grounds. But alongside these lessons of labor, he demonstrated a natural intelligence that could not be contained by circumstance alone. He observed patterns in the world around him, the schedules of the overseers, the movements of the master's household, the subtle interactions between the enslaved and the free. He learned to read people with an acuity that would later serve him in understanding the complexities of human behavior, the nuances of trust, and the unspoken hierarchies that governed relationships, even within a world of oppression. His childhood was not devoid of moments of tenderness, though they were rare and fleeting. There were times when older slaves took him under their wing, teaching him small lessons about survival, caution, and the subtle arts of negotiation and persuasion that were essential in a life constrained by servitude. They shared with him stories of the wider world, of escapes, rebellions in distant lands where freedom might exist, planting in him the first seeds of longing for a life beyond the plantation. These stories, while often framed as cautionary tales, sparked a restless imagination, and he began to see, even as a child, that the boundaries imposed upon him were not entirely immutable. Despite the oppressive circumstances of his birth, he possessed a natural charm and presence that drew the attention of those around him. Other children on the plantation looked up to him both for his intelligence and for a quiet confidence that suggested he understood things others did not. His demeanor was calm but alert. He learned to balance deference with subtle displays of self-assurance, understanding that the wrong gesture could provoke punishment, while the right one could earn him small privileges or moments of trust. In these formative years, he began to cultivate a keen sense of observation, a skill that would later allow him to navigate the complexities of society far beyond the plantation gates. Education for enslaved children was rare and often forbidden, yet he found ways to absorb knowledge in secret. Watching the widow and her household, he listened to conversations about trade, politics, and literature. He memorized patterns of speech, absorbed vocabulary, and learned to understand concepts that were officially reserved for the free and privileged. Some of the older, more trusting members of the household occasionally taught him to read and write in secret, recognizing his curiosity and intelligence. These clandestine lessons became a lifeline, opening a window to a world beyond labor and obedience, a world he longed to explore even as he remained bound by the harsh realities of his present. As he grew into adolescence, the challenges of life under slavery became more pronounced. Physical labor increased in intensity and expectation. He was required to work from sunrise to sunset, often performing tasks far beyond what would have been considered appropriate for someone his age in free society. Yet, even amid exhaustion, he retained a resilience and determination that marked him as extraordinary. He found ways to demonstrate initiative and skill, whether by tending the livestock with an unusual attentiveness, repairing tools with precision, or assisting in the management of the estate's smaller operations. His aptitude did not go unnoticed by the overseers or the widow's household, though their recognition was limited to a pragmatic acknowledgement of usefulness rather than admiration of character. The environment in which he grew up was one of constant tension, a delicate balance between authority and survival. Enslaved individuals were expected to obey without question, yet they also developed subtle methods of asserting their own agency. The way a task was performed, the timing of a conversation, or even a glance that conveyed understanding or defiance. He quickly learned the importance of discretion, of understanding not just what was said, but what was left unsaid, of recognizing opportunities for small victories without provoking the wrath of those in power. This skill would later prove crucial, allowing him to navigate the extraordinary circumstances that arose when his life intersected with the widow's in ways that society could neither condone nor comprehend. His adolescence was also marked by a growing awareness of the stark contrast that defined his existence. He watched the widow move through her life with freedom, privilege, and authority, managing her household and social obligations with grace and command. He observed the delicacy of her interactions with peers, the subtle influence she wielded, and the way she balanced power with empathy. From these observations, he learned much about human nature, the exercise of authority, and the possibilities inherent in knowledge and skill. He began to imagine a life that might extend beyond the plantation, a life in which he could assert his own will, cultivate his own intelligence, and perhaps in some small measure claim the dignity denied to him by circumstance of birth. As he matured, his character developed. in response to both the harshness of oppression and the glimpses of possibility he saw around him. He became known among the enslaved for his quiet strength, for his ability to listen and advise, and for the courage he displayed in the face of authority. He understood the value of patience, of waiting for the right moment to act or speak, and of choosing allies carefully. His intelligence, combined with his understanding of human behavior, made him a figure of respect and intrigue among those who labored alongside him. Yet he was also acutely aware of the limits imposed upon him. Freedom, opportunity, and recognition were always contingent on factors beyond his control, and missteps could result in punishment or worse. Despite the constraints of his world, he retained a curiosity and longing that distinguished him from others. He was drawn to knowledge, to understanding the intricacies of the widow's estate, and to imagining a life where his skills and intellect might be recognized and valued. This desire was not born merely of ambition, but of a deep-seated sense of self-worth and awareness of potential. He understood that the color of his skin, the status of his birth, and the legal framework of slavery placed enormous barriers in his path, yet he refused to be defined solely by these limitations. In his mind, there existed the possibility of crossing boundaries, of forming relationships and achieving recognition that society would deem impossible. During these years, he also began to develop an understanding of relationships of power and influence beyond the simple master-slave dynamic. He observed interactions within the widow's household, noticing the alliances, the favors exchanged, and the subtle ways in which influence was exerted. He learned to communicate carefully, to offer counsel when appropriate, and to anticipate the needs and reactions of those in authority. These skills were cultivated out of necessity, but they also reflected his innate intelligence and perceptiveness. Over time, he became someone whose presence, though constrained by status, was quietly noted and sometimes even relied upon. As the years progressed, he began to witness the social rituals of the elite in Savannah, events that were forbidden to him but deeply formative in understanding the world he inhabited. He saw how wealth dictated power, how alliances were forged and broken, and how perception could often outweigh reality in determining reputation. These observations shaped his understanding of human nature, sharpening his ability to navigate relationships, to recognize opportunity, and to understand the subtle tensions that govern society. He understood, even in his youth, that the world was not merely divided by wealth and class, but by knowledge, strategy, and courage, the same qualities that He was quietly cultivating within himself. By the time he reached young adulthood, he had become a man whose intelligence, skill, and awareness set him apart from most of those around him. He possessed the physical strength, honed by years of labor, but also a mental acuity that allowed him to read situations and people with remarkable clarity. His character was tempered by hardship, yet it retained a quiet dignity and resilience. He had learned to navigate the complex moral and social landscape of the plantation, to balance obedience with subtle assertion of agency, and to cultivate a sense of self-worth that transcended the limitations imposed by society. It was within this context that he first became aware of the widow, not merely as a figure of authority, but as a person of intelligence, curiosity, and perhaps even understanding. Her presence, her decisiveness, and her awareness of the world around her resonated with him in ways that few others did. He recognized in her a mind capable of seeing beyond convention, a heart that might value qualities other than lineage and wealth, and a person whose own experiences of constraint could, in some mysterious way, mirror his own. These perceptions planted the first seeds of connection, laying the groundwork for a relationship that would ultimately defy every expectation of the society in which they lived. The son of the widow's late slave had been shaped by a life of labor, oppression, observation, and subtle self-assertion. He had developed skills, intelligence, and awareness far beyond what was typical for someone in his position. His understanding of human behavior, his strategic thinking, and his quiet resilience prepared him to navigate challenges that would arise later, challenges that would require both courage and wisdom. His life, marked by contrasts between oppression and observation, limitation and potential, prepared him for an extraordinary path, a path that would eventually intersect with the widow's own restless spirit in a way that society could neither condone nor control. And that would lead to one of Savannah's most forbidden and unforgettable unions. The beginning of their connection was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, like a whisper in the wind that neither the world nor they fully understood. In the quiet moments on the plantation, when the air was heavy with the scent of magnolia blooms and the distant sounds of laboring fields softened into a lull, their paths began to cross with increasing frequency. She observed him not as the son of a slave, not merely as a figure within the rigid hierarchy of her estate, but as someone whose intelligence, composure, and quiet resilience mirrored qualities she herself valued, qualities she had long recognized as rare and extraordinary. He, in turn, saw in her a woman unlike any other he had known, one who combined authority with empathy, command with understanding, and wealth with a curiosity about life that transcended the rigid boundaries of their social world. Their initial interactions were cautious, measured, constrained by awareness of the scrutiny that shadowed every step they took, yet within these moments a subtle recognition of something extraordinary began to grow. The risks of their connection were ever present, like dark clouds looming on a horizon they could not ignore. Any hint of impropriety between a woman of her standing and a man of his status would have been scandalous beyond measure. Society had its rules, sharp and unyielding, and the consequences for violating them were severe. Gossip spread like wildfire in Savannah, and the reputations of both individuals, as well as those of their families, could be irreparably damaged by the mere whisper of a perceived indiscretion. For him, the danger was even more immediate. A transgression, real or imagined, could result in brutal punishment, reassignment, or other forms of retaliation from overseers or those invested in maintaining the strict social order. Every glance, every word, every accidental touch carried weight, and both understood that the boundaries they navigated were as much psychological as they were physical. Despite the ever-present danger, their interactions deepened. Moments of conversation began to extend beyond practical necessity, moving into areas of shared curiosity, intellect, and understanding. She asked questions that no one else would consider, and he responded with insights that revealed not only his knowledge, but also a keen awareness of the world around him. They spoke of the rhythms of the plantation, the subtle movements of people, the intricacies of her household, and occasionally of ideas that reached beyond the confines of Savannah itself. These exchanges were small acts of rebellion, gestures that asserted the value of intellect and personality in a society that often judged solely by status, birth, and color. In these conversations, the invisible walls that separated master from slave, privileged from oppressed, began to shift, if only imperceptibly, creating a space where mutual respect and understanding could exist. Their shared awareness of danger heightened the intensity of every encounter. Each meeting required careful calculation, observation, and timing. He learned to read her expressions, to understand her moods, and to anticipate moments when they could speak freely without drawing attention. She likewise recognized the subtleties of his behavior, noting the patience, the restraint, and the intelligence with which he navigated interactions with her and others. These moments of understanding created a silent intimacy, a connection built on mutual recognition of talent, insight, and the courage to exist authentically within a world that denied such authenticity to both of them. The emotional stakes escalated as their awareness of each other's inner lives deepened. He began to feel a sense of admiration, then affection, for the woman who, despite the privileges and limitations of her world, recognized him as more than a laborer, more than a social inferior. She in turn found herself drawn to his strength, resilience, and mind, qualities that no other man in her social circle possessed in equal measure. These feelings were not simple. They were complicated by societal expectation, personal history, and the ever-present awareness of risk. Yet they were undeniable, and the intensity of the connection, hidden beneath layers of propriety and discretion, began to shape the rhythm of their daily lives. The progression from recognition to affection was marked by subtle gestures and moments of trust. A shared glance across the courtyard, a carefully phrased comment in conversation, an unspoken acknowledgement of understanding, all became acts laden with meaning. Each risk was measured, each step forward considered with care. In a society where appearances were paramount, they learned to conceal their growing bond behind the mask of ordinary interactions, ensuring that their closeness remained invisible to prying eyes while deepening in the privacy of shared understanding. They also found common ground in their mutual experience of constraint and responsibility. She had lived her life bound by societal expectations, by rules dictating behavior, marriage, and propriety. He had lived his bound by laws and customs that treated him as property rather than a person. This shared awareness of limitation, though vastly different in magnitude and consequence, created a bridge between them, a recognition that both had navigated worlds that sought to define them by circumstances beyond their control. In this recognition, there emerged a form of solidarity, a bond built not merely on attraction but on understanding, empathy, and the courage to seek connection. Despite the potential cost, the secrecy of their relationship demanded creativity and patience. They developed methods of communication that minimized exposure, brief, casual conversations under the pretense of necessity, messages conveyed through gestures or carefully chosen words, moments of observation disguised as oversight or instruction. Each interaction required attention to detail, a careful assessment of surroundings, and a constant awareness of potential witnesses. The thrill of connection was inseparable from the tension of danger. Every encounter carried the weight of possibility and the fear of discovery. This duality intensified their emotional bond, imbuing ordinary moments with extraordinary significance and creating a sense of intimacy that transcended conventional understanding. As their relationship deepened, they began to recognize shared values and aspirations. Both possessed intelligence, curiosity, and a desire to understand the world beyond their immediate circumstances. They shared a sense of resilience, a capacity for patience, and a recognition that influence and power could be exercised in subtle, strategic ways. These commonalities add a foundation for trust and mutual respect, even as societal rules insisted that their worlds remain separate. The more they recognized in each other a kindred spirit, the stronger their connection became, setting the stage for choices that would ultimately defy every expectation of class, race, and propriety. The tension between desire and loyalty grew with every interaction. For him, the challenge was balancing natural affection and admiration with the necessity of survival within an oppressive system. One misstep could provoke punishment or derail the fragile trust they had cultivated. For her, the stakes were equally high, though of a different nature. A scandal could destroy her social standing, compromise her authority, and invite the censure of peers whose influence shaped every aspect of Savannah society. Both understood that their growing connection was dangerous, yet the magnetic pull of mutual understanding, admiration, and eventually love was irresistible, drawing them closer with each passing day despite the consequences that loomed like dark clouds above them. As they navigated this complex emotional landscape, the plantation itself became both a stage and a constraint. The rhythm of daily labor, the movement of overseers, and the ever-present gaze of society's expectations created a backdrop against which every interaction was framed. Yet within this constrained environment, they found moments of freedom, spaces where conversation, observation, and shared understanding could flourish. A glance across a field, a whispered remark during an ordinary task, or the quiet attention to detail in shared responsibilities became opportunities to explore connection and intimacy without overt exposure. These moments, fleeting and precarious, reinforced the significance of their bond and heightened the sense of urgency and intensity that defined their relationship. They were also aware of the broader implications of their connection. Beyond personal risk, their growing bond challenged the fundamental principles of the social world in which they lived. Relationships between individuals of their respective statuses were forbidden not only by custom, but by law, and the consequences of transgression were severe. They understood that their connection, if discovered, could provoke outrage, scandal, and punishment potentially, affecting not only themselves but also those around them. This awareness added weight and gravity to every interaction, creating a dynamic in which each gesture, word, and glance carried profound significance. Over time, their interactions developed a rhythm and depth that went beyond curiosity or fleeting attraction. They began to understand each other's thoughts, motivations, and perspectives in ways that few others could. He recognized her capacity for empathy, her courage in navigating social expectation, and her intelligence in managing her household and social position. She recognized his strength, his resilience, and his capacity for insight despite the limitations imposed by his circumstances. This mutual recognition created a bond that was simultaneously exhilarating, terrifying, and transformative, drawing them into a connection that would ultimately defy every boundary society had imposed upon them. The clandestine nature of their relationship heightened the intensity of their feelings. In a world where even minor transgressions could provoke ruin, each moment of connection was precious, each exchange loaded with meaning. The danger they faced intensified emotions, creating a sense of urgency and depth that would not have existed in a less restrictive environment. They developed an intuitive understanding of timing, opportunity, and discretion, allowing them to communicate, support, and understand each other without exposing themselves to unnecessary risk. This careful balance of secrecy and connection became a defining feature of their relationship, shaping the emotional and psychological landscape in which their bond grew. Despite the danger, they began to envision a life in which their connection could exist more openly. While still bound by societal constraints, they explored the possibilities of a future shaped not solely by circumstance, but by choice, courage, and mutual support. This vision, though tentative and fragile, provided motivation and hope, creating a psychological space in which they could imagine a life that defied expectation and embraced possibility. The awareness of risk made every shared moment more precious, every expression of trust and understanding more significant, and every gesture of affection more profound. In these years, their relationship evolved into one of deep emotional and intellectual intimacy. They shared confidences, discussed ideas, and learned to navigate the complex moral and social terrain of the plantation together. Their connection was not merely physical or superficial. It was rooted in understanding, respect, and the recognition of qualities in each other that society sought to suppress or ignore. The more they understood each other, the more they realized that their bond was extraordinary, a rare intersection of minds and hearts that transcended the boundaries imposed by birth, status, and custom. The challenges they faced only strengthened their connection. Each risk, each obstacle, and each moment of potential exposure reinforced the need for trust, patience, and mutual understanding. They learned to communicate without words, to recognize subtle signals, and to rely on intuition and observation. In a world structured to separate them, they created a private universe of shared understanding in which Intellect, courage, and emotion could coexist freely, even if only temporarily and precariously. Their growing intimacy was also marked by moments of tension and conflict. They had to constantly navigate fear, uncertainty, and the weight of societal expectations. Misunderstandings or lapses in judgment could have dire consequences. Yet these challenges reinforced the depth of their commitment to discretion, to understanding, and to each other. They learned resilience, adaptability, and strategic thinking, qualities that would serve them not only in navigating their secret relationship, but also in confronting the extraordinary choices that lay ahead. Ultimately, the forbidden nature of their connection transformed ordinary moments into extraordinary ones. The stolen glances, whispered conversations, and shared observations were charged with meaning, creating a bond that transcended the social and legal constraints of their world. Each interaction deepened trust, strengthened affection, and heightened the emotional intensity of their relationship, laying the groundwork for decisions and actions that would forever alter the course of their lives, challenge societal norms, and leave an indelible mark on the history of Savannah. The planning of their union was a task fraught with tension, secrecy, and unprecedented audacity. In 1839 Savannah, the idea of a wealthy widow marrying the son of her late slave was not merely unconventional, it was considered socially unthinkable, a challenge to every deeply ingrained principle of class, race, and propriety. Yet, for the widow and the young man she had come to know, respect, and love, the bond they shared had reached a point where concealment alone could no longer sustain it. They began to deliberate carefully, navigating the myriad obstacles that lay before them. Every step required consideration, the legal ramifications, the expectations of society, the potential backlash from family, neighbors, and even strangers whose opinions were as sharp as any weapon in dismantling reputations. They understood that their decision would not simply be a personal act of defiance, it would be a public statement in a world that demanded strict adherence to social hierarchies. The first challenge was discretion. Savannah, with its tight-knit community and observant populace, left little room for privacy. News traveled quickly through whispered conversations at markets, churches, and social gatherings. Any indication of a connection between a widow of notable wealth and a man of enslaved heritage would be immediately scrutinized, speculated upon, and condemned. They had to find allies who could be trusted to assist them without risking exposure. Household staff became confidants, though carefully chosen for loyalty, discretion, and reliability. They devised subtle methods of communication, using the rhythms of daily life to exchange information and coordinate preparations, ensuring that every detail remained hidden until the moment was right. Beyond secrecy, there were logistical and legal complexities to consider. Marriage between a widow of prominent social standing and a man of enslaved lineage was, in the eyes of the law and society, deeply complicated. Questions arose. How would property rights be managed? What recognition, if any, would the young man receive in terms of status or inheritance? How would the ceremony itself be conducted in a way that minimized public scrutiny, yet honored their commitment to each other? These issues required careful negotiation, strategic planning, and a deep understanding of both the letter of the law and the unwritten rules of societal acceptance. The widow's intelligence, experience in managing her estate, and nuanced understanding of social dynamics proved invaluable. She orchestrated meetings, communicated with legal advisors in secret, and devised strategies to protect their interests while ensuring the authenticity of their vows. At the same time, they faced the emotional challenge of anticipation and fear. Both understood the stakes, yet the intensity of their bond lent courage and urgency to their actions. Every decision was informed not only by love and desire, but by an acute awareness of the potential consequences. They were acutely conscious that any misstep could result in scandal, legal repercussions, or even physical danger for him. This tension infused their planning with both care and intensity, making each step forward a deliberate act of courage. Despite the fear, there was also exhilaration. The knowledge that they were daring to defy the rigid hierarchies of their society, to claim agency in a world that sought to deny them, created a profound sense of purpose and determination. Reactions to their decision, once known to a few trusted confidants, were mixed. Some were incredulous, unable to fathom the audacity of such a union. Others expressed concern for the widow, fearing that her reputation and social influence would be irreparably damaged. Even among those who were sympathetic, there was hesitation, a recognition of the risks that accompanied aligning themselves with a choice so controversial. Yet in the midst of these doubts and fears, the bond between the widow and the young man remained steadfast. Their mutual understanding of risk, respect, and affection fortified them against external judgment, allowing them to move forward despite the pressures that surrounded them. The day of the wedding itself became a carefully orchestrated event, a balancing act between visibility and discretion, tradition and rebellion. Invitations were extended selectively, with only the most trusted members of society and household present. The ceremony had to honor social expectations enough to avoid immediate scandal, yet reflect the authenticity of their commitment and the deep personal significance of the moment. The widow, adorned in attire that blended tradition with personal expression, moved with grace and composure, aware of the symbolic weight her presence carried. Every gesture, every word spoken in the ceremony was calculated to convey respect, sincerity, and authority, while minimizing exposure to potential detractors or critics. The young man, equally aware of the extraordinary nature of the occasion, approached the ceremony with a mixture of pride, reverence, and apprehension. He understood that the eyes of the world, whether present or imagined, would judge him not only as an individual, but as a representative of a marginalized group, and that his conduct would be scrutinized for both adherence to propriety and demonstration of character. Yet he was fortified by the bond he shared with the widow, by the knowledge that their union was rooted in genuine affection, mutual respect, and an extraordinary courage that defied societal expectation. As the ceremony progressed, subtle details underscored the significance of the moment. The exchange of vows, the placement of rings, and the acknowledgement of each other's humanity and equality were acts that, while personal, resonated with profound social symbolism. Every word spoken challenged the rigid social hierarchies of Savannah. Every gesture asserted the legitimacy of a bond that society sought to deny. Their commitment was both an intimate declaration of love and a public statement, a quiet revolution conducted within the confines of a single ceremony that carried implications far beyond their personal lives. The reactions among attendees varied. Some were visibly shocked, unable to conceal expressions of disbelief or concern. Others, perhaps quietly impressed or moved by the courage of the act, offered restrained smiles or polite nods of acknowledgement. Among the household staff, there was a sense of admiration, tempered by caution. They recognized both the audacity and the fragility of the situation, understanding that support could be both a source of strength and a potential liability. Throughout the ceremony, the couple navigated these reactions with composure, maintaining focus on the significance of their union rather than the judgments of others. After the ceremony, the couple faced the immediate challenges of social perception and community reaction. Savannah society was not forgiving of deviations from the norm, and whispers began to circulate, even among those who had not attended the wedding. Letters carried subtle commentary. Merchants and neighbors speculated, and the widow's reputation became a subject of both fascination and consternation. Yet despite the mounting scrutiny, they remained steadfast. Their marriage was more than a personal milestone. It was an act of defiance, a deliberate assertion of agency, and a testament to the power of affection, respect, and mutual recognition in the face of societal opposition. The days following the wedding were marked by careful negotiation of visibility and discretion. They continued to manage the estate, attend to social obligations, and navigate the intricacies of Savannah life, all while maintaining the integrity of their bond. They encountered both resistance and curiosity, with some individuals attempting to undermine their position through gossip or veiled threats, while others approached with cautious admiration or genuine support. In every interaction, the couple relied upon the strategies and skills they had developed over years of observation, patience, and mutual trust, reinforcing their commitment and demonstrating a resilience that was essential to their survival and dignity. The social implications of their marriage were profound. It challenged entrenched beliefs about class, race, and propriety, forcing those who observed it to confront the limitations of their own assumptions. It highlighted the complexity of human relationships, the capacity for love and respect to transcend boundaries, and the courage required to act in accordance with personal conviction rather than societal expectation. For the widow and her husband, the act of marrying was both a culmination of years of careful planning and observation and a beginning, a declaration that their lives and their choices would no longer be entirely dictated by the rigid hierarchies of their community. In the weeks and months that followed, the couple worked to establish a new normal within the estate and the broader society. They cultivated alliances, reinforced trust with loyal confidants, and navigated social events with an awareness of perception and propriety. Their marriage became a touchstone for discussion, fascination, and in some quarters, resentment, illustrating the disruptive power of an act that challenged deeply ingrained societal norms. Each day reinforced the reality that their union was not merely a private matter, but a symbol of courage, defiance, and the possibility of transcending boundaries long considered immutable. The wedding and the careful planning that preceded it became emblematic of both the personal and societal stakes involved in the relationship. It required intelligence, foresight, courage, and discretion, demanding that both individuals navigate the complex interplay of love, risk, and social expectation with skill and determination. Their success in orchestrating a ceremony that honored their bond while minimizing immediate exposure was a testament to their resourcefulness, mutual respect, and shared understanding of the broader world in which they lived. Ultimately, the controversial wedding was more than an event. It was a statement, a deliberate challenge to the structures of power and prejudice that governed Savannah. It demonstrated the capacity of human connection to transcend imposed boundaries, the courage required to act in accordance with personal conviction, and the delicate balance of strategy, discretion, and emotional depth necessary to navigate a world unprepared for such an act. The couple's marriage became a symbol of defiance, resilience, and the transformative potential of love, leaving a lasting impression on those who witnessed it and on the history of the city itself. Days, months, and years that followed the widow and her husband's forbidden union were a mixture of quiet resilience, ongoing scrutiny, and a gradually emerging legacy that neither of them could have fully anticipated at the time of their marriage. Savannah, a city bound by strict social hierarchies and deeply ingrained racial and class divisions, was not forgiving of deviations from societal norms, and their marriage quickly became a subject of fascination, speculation, and in many circles, outright condemnation. Whispers traveled through the city's streets, from church pews to marketplaces, from drawing rooms to carriage paths, carrying with them half-truths, exaggerations, and interpretations of events shaped as much by fear and prejudice as by reality. Yet despite the intensity of public attention, the couple remained steadfast, committed to one another, and increasingly confident in the life they were building together. The initial social response was unsurprisingly harsh. Members of the widow's social class expressed disbelief and, in some cases, outrage. To them, the very idea of a respected woman choosing a husband from a lineage historically considered subordinate represented a violation of decorum, propriety, and even morality as they understood it. Invitations ceased to arrive at the estate from long-standing acquaintances. Certain families distanced themselves publicly, and the social networks she had cultivated over decades began to fracture under the weight of gossip. Letters of disapproval circulated, often couched in terms of concern or advice, yet the underlying tone was unmistakable. Her choice was dangerous, improper, and shocking. For the young man, the consequences were different but equally potent. While the law had historically defined him as property, the act of marriage, public and acknowledged, placed him in an unprecedented social position. To some, he was a usurper, daring to claim equality with the very class that had long oppressed him. To others, he was an object of admiration, a symbol of courage and intellect that defied the circumstances of his birth. In the midst of such reactions, the couple developed a network of support among those who recognized the authenticity and bravery of their union. Household staff, confidants, and a few sympathetic members of society provided practical assistance, counsel, and most importantly, discretion. These allies were crucial in helping the couple navigate daily life in a city eager to scrutinize and judge. Through careful management, strategic planning, and unwavering commitment to one another, the widow and her husband established a life that balanced public perception with personal reality. They continued to manage the estate, attend to business affairs, and maintain social appearances, all while preserving the integrity of their relationship and the dignity of their household. Beyond the immediate social dynamics, their marriage had deeper cultural and psychological implications. It challenged entrenched notions of hierarchy, race, and gender that had been assumed immutable. The act of choosing love, mutual respect, and intellectual compatibility over societal expectation forced the community to confront questions they had long avoided. What defines worth? What determines legitimacy in relationships? How can power and agency be exercised across the artificial boundaries imposed by birth and wealth? These questions were uncomfortable, unsettling, and provocative, forcing observers to grapple with realities that contradicted their understanding of the social order. In this way, the widow and her husband were not merely living their lives, they were actively reshaping perceptions and planting the seeds of dialogue that would resonate long after their immediate story faded from public attention. The couple's relationship was further tested by the pressures of integration and acceptance within broader society. While they had achieved a private victory in marrying, the challenge of living publicly as a legitimate union was formidable. They had to negotiate interactions with neighbors, merchants, and other members of the social elite, constantly aware that their every action might be interpreted as evidence of propriety or impropriety. In response, they cultivated a demeanor that balanced authority with approachability, intelligence with humility, and courage with tact. Their ability to maintain composure in the face of scrutiny not only protected their household but also gradually reshaped perceptions among those willing to observe their character rather than merely their lineage. Over time, the story of their marriage began to take on a more complex character within Savannah society. For some, it remained a scandal, a cautionary tale of defiance and impropriety. For others, it became a narrative of courage, love, and the possibility of transcending barriers once thought insurmountable. The widow and her husband, through their actions and demeanor, forced observers to recognize that true connection, mutual respect, and personal integrity could not be constrained by rigid hierarchies or social expectation. Their presence in Savannah, maintained with dignity and resolve, created a living example of defiance that was at once disruptive and inspiring. The implications of their union also extended into the lives of those around them, particularly their family and household staff. Children, servants, and others connected to the estate witnessed a model of resilience, strategic thinking, and emotional depth that contrasted sharply with the conventional narratives of obedience, subservience, and constrained opportunity. For the young man, who had spent his life navigating the limitations imposed upon him by slavery, the act of marriage transformed both his social identity and his personal sense of agency. He moved from a position defined by ownership and restriction to one of recognition, legitimacy, and influence, albeit in a society that continued to monitor, judge, and often resent his presence. The couple's marriage also had implications for legal and property matters. The widow's wealth, previously managed and inherited under the strictures of her late husband's estate, now had to accommodate a union that society might contest, that legal authorities might scrutinize, and that relatives might challenge. Careful documentation, strategic alliances, and prudent negotiation were required to secure the rights and interests of both spouses. These efforts were not merely practical, they represented a broader assertion of agency and legitimacy, a refusal to allow social conventions or prejudiced interpretations to define the terms of their life together. Despite the continued scrutiny, the couple maintained a private world within their household, a space in which mutual respect, understanding, and love flourished without the constraints of social expectation. In these private moments, they could converse freely, plan for the future, and nurture emotional and intellectual growth. These interactions were not mere indulgences. They were essential to sustaining the courage and resilience required to navigate a society unwilling to accept their union. The intimacy of these moments, combined with the skillful management of public perception, allowed the widow and her husband to build a life that was simultaneously authentic and strategically resilient. As the years progressed, the story of their union became part of the broader social memory of Savannah. Local histories, family anecdotes, and oral traditions preserved the narrative, sometimes embellishing it, sometimes moralizing it, but always recognizing the extraordinary nature of the couple's decision. Historians and chroniclers would later note the significance of the marriage, not only for its audacity, but for its demonstration of the complex interplay between personal agency, societal expectation, and the enduring human capacity for connection across boundaries. The widow and her husband became symbols of both defiance and possibility, their lives illustrating that courage, intellect, and emotional depth could disrupt established norms and create a legacy that endured beyond immediate scandal. Their marriage also inspired subtle shifts within the social fabric of Savannah. While rigid hierarchies remained and prejudice persisted, the very act of public defiance created space for reflection, dialogue, and, in some quarters, a reconsideration of assumptions about class, race, and personal agency. Younger generations, in particular, observed the couple with a mixture of fascination and admiration, learning that social expectation could be challenged without necessarily destroying the individual who dared to act. In this way, the legacy of their union extended beyond the personal, influencing cultural and social perceptions in ways that were both gradual and profound. On a personal level, the widow and her husband cultivated a deep and enduring partnership. Their shared experiences of risk, observation, and defiance forged a bond that was resilient to the pressures of external judgment. They learned to navigate the complex interplay of public scrutiny and private authenticity, developing strategies to protect themselves while nurturing the growth of their relationship. Their life together became an ongoing negotiation between societal expectation and personal desire, a testament to the possibilities inherent in courage, intelligence, and mutual respect. The social and emotional resonance of their marriage also extended to subsequent generations. Children born of the union were raised in a household that modeled resilience, intellect, and agency, preparing them to navigate a world in which societal prejudice remained a constant reality. These descendants inherited not only material wealth, but also a legacy of courage and strategic thinking, a reminder that the choices of their parents had transcended the limitations of circumstance to create a foundation for personal and social empowerment. The widow and her husband's story continued to ripple through Savannah society long after the initial shock of their marriage had faded. Their actions were cited in discussions of morality, propriety, and courage, often framed as examples of both defiance and principle. The lessons embedded in their union of intelligence, empathy, discretion, and courage resonated across social boundaries, challenging observers to reconsider the nature of power, legitimacy, and human connection. In the private sphere, their lives were characterized by partnership, respect, and mutual support, demonstrating that the deepest bonds often arise in the most unlikely of circumstances, and that courage and affection can coexist even amid societal hostility. Over time, their union became a case study in the power of human agency to shape destiny. By navigating the intricacies of social expectation, legal ambiguity, and personal risk, they not only created a life together, but also left a legacy that challenged assumptions about hierarchy, race, and gender. Their marriage demonstrated that the assertion of love and respect, even under conditions of extreme constraint, could have enduring significance. The story of their lives, preserved through oral histories, letters, and historical accounts, continued to captivate and inspire, illustrating the transformative potential of courage, strategy, and emotional depth. Even decades later, the marriage remained a point of reference in discussions of Savannah's social history. Scholars, writers, and local storytellers reference the audacity of the widow and her husband, noting the risks they had taken, the societal boundaries they had defied, and the profound personal integrity with which they navigated the challenges before them. Their story became emblematic, not merely of scandal or defiance, but of the broader human capacity to assert dignity, pursue connection, and challenge injustice, even when faced with overwhelming odds. Ultimately, the legacy of their union was multifaceted. It encompassed social disruption, personal triumph, cultural reflection, and the enduring power of love and courage. It demonstrated that relationships grounded in mutual respect and understanding could transcend societal boundaries and reshape perceptions of what was possible. It revealed the capacity of individuals to navigate constraint, defy expectation, and create a life of significance through strategic action, empathy, and resilience. The widow and her husband, through their choices and their steadfast commitment to one another, left an indelible mark on their community, history, and the imagination of those who would hear their story long after they were gone. The imagination would hear